I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch network. The MAGA extremist in the Trump administration, Peter Navarro, who has been charged by the Department of Justice with contempt of Congress for not responding to the January 6th committee's subpoena for his personal appearance for deposition testimony and for him to produce records. Well, Peter Navarro has lost his motion to dismiss in front of federal Judge Amit Mehta in a 39-page scathing ruling. Judge Amit Mehta denied all of the assertions by Peter Navarro as to why the criminal case against him for contempt of Congress should be dismissed, and Judge Amit Mehta granted all of the Department of Justice's requests for what's called motion in limines, which are also just known as motions to exclude certain pieces of evidence that Peter Navarro wants to try and introduce at his trial. So now that this federal judge, Amit Mehta in Washington, D.C., has denied Navarro's last gasp at trying to get his contempt of Congress charge dismissed, trial will be set for January 30th. It will be a relatively simple and straightforward trial, the same way that Bannon's only took a few days, where the Department of Justice is just going to have to show that they sent a subpoena to Navarro, that Navarro received the subpoena, and Navarro put his you-know-what finger to the January 6th committee and did not show up, and that is criminal. One of the more powerful lines from Judge Amit Mehta's 39-page order is he writes, quote, "Defendant Peter Navarro apparently believes the law applies differently to him." Well, it does not. And one of the arguments Peter Navarro tried to make is a separation of powers argument, and he asserts that Donald Trump asserted executive privilege and that the assertion of executive privilege is the reason why he did not show up in response to the January 6th committee subpoenas. Judge Amit Mehta rejected that and said, without even going to the merits of whether or not an executive privilege assertion by Trump in this situation would be valid in the first place, Trump never asserted executive privilege with respect to you at all. You have no evidence, no documents, no nothing that would establish that in real time Donald Trump ever made an assertion of executive privilege. And Peter Navarro's argument was, well, it happened in a super secret area. And Judge Amit Mehta says, well, what evidence do you have that that was ever made? Is there a letter? Is there an email? And so I don't even have to get to the issue about whether or not executive privilege is valid or invalidly asserted to begin with, because Donald Trump did not assert it at all. So yes, you are a Trump sycophant, but Trump didn't even do you the traitorous solid of asserting executive privilege to begin with. One of the next arguments that Peter Navarro tried to assert is he tried to say that there was some Department of Justice memorandum which would somehow prohibit the Department of Justice from prosecuting him. And the Department of Justice says, well, that's not true. You're making that up. And Judge Amit Mehta said, absolutely not. One of the other arguments that Peter Navarro made what's called a public authority defense. He argued, look, I was just following the orders of Donald Trump. Even if you don't assert executive privilege, essentially his argument is I was entrapped. I was somehow deceived and lied to by governmental entities to break the law, and that's what led me to do this, and so I should be able to have this case dismissed. And the judge is like, what the heck are you talking about? There's no entrapment here. There's no lawful orders that have been given you to avoid showing up to the January 6th committee's subpoena. And then Peter Navarro makes this argument that a lot of these insurrectionists and MAGA extremists have tried to make in front of federal court, and they all failed, where they try to argue, oh, the January 6th committee is not properly constituted. It's an illegal committee because it doesn't have the appropriate composition. All of the federal courts said, nope, that is incorrect. It is a properly constituted committee. Their subpoena is a valid subpoena, and you had to respond. Oh, yeah, one other argument that Navarro made. He's like, oh, I'm being selectively prosecuted. Why aren't you prosecuting all of these other people? Well, the circumstances are different here. Who are you talking about, too? So essentially his argument is that because the Department of Justice didn't prosecute Mark Meadows and didn't prosecute, a few others for contempt of Congress, that is the reason why Navarro should get off, and the court rejected that, and the Department of Justice rejected that. One of the differences is that it's at least believed that Donald Trump may have asserted executive privilege as it relates to Mark Meadows, but never asserted executive privilege at all as it relates to Peter Navarro, which explains differences of circumstances. And the Department of Justice is engaged in other likely criminal investigations of Mark Meadows regarding his conduct during the January 6th insurrection and leading up to it, and all of Mark Meadows' messages. So the Department of Justice can use its prosecutorial discretion regarding when and who to prosecute. And ultimately, as I've believed here on the MeidasTouch Network, and I've talked about before, ultimately, because contempt of Congress, the charge that Navarro's been charged with and the charge that Bannon's been charged with, is still a misdemeanor. Each count carries with it up to 1 year in prison. I think the Department of Justice said, look, it doesn't make sense for us to use all of our efforts and resources on Mark Meadows yet regarding the contempt of Congress. Mark Meadows potentially can be convicted of or charged with seditious conspiracy, other conspiracies relating to the January 6th insurrection, obstruction of official proceedings, and other very serious criminal conduct. I mean, Meadows was the hub and the conduit of a lot of the planning of the insurrection. So I just think that the Department of Justice and now Special Counsel Jack Smith is like, look, Mark Meadows, by the way, we haven't heard Mark Meadows' name a lot, so I think Meadows is cooperating, but they probably have gone to Meadows and Meadows' lawyer, and the Department of Justice has said, look, we've got you on all these other charges. We need your cooperation regarding our case regarding, Donald Trump, and regarding our case regarding other potential targets of their insurrection prosecution. So you don't have to treat them all identical. And so anyway, Peter Navarro's argument there was rejected. At the same time, the motion to dismiss that was filed by Navarro was denied by the court. The court also granted essentially all of the motion in limines. Again, these are what's known as motions to exclude evidence that Navarro wants to enter, because Navarro, like Steve Bannon, want to turn the trial into a circus. And as I mentioned, a contempt of Congress case is a very simple one. It's you got the subpoena, you didn't show up. So all the other noise that you're trying to create, we're not going to allow that into trial. That's what the judge here ruled. And by the way, that is what the judge in the Steve Bannon case also ruled, that all that other outside noise doesn't come in here. And different federal judges, and the Bannon judge was appointed by Donald Trump. Amit Mehta, the judge here, was an Obama appointee. So one of the the things that Navarro wants to introduce at his criminal trial is, I've been entrapped, you forced me into this, and executive privilege. Donald Trump gave me the secret executive privilege, and the committee is improperly assembled, and I'm being selectively prosecuted, and they should have prosecuted Meadows if they're coming after me for contempt of Congress. I'm being politically persecuted. He wants to do a political persecution defense. That contempt of Congress is so rare. Why are you targeting me with contempt of Congress? So those are the types of things that Navarro wants to be able to argue at his criminal trial. And Judge Amit Mehta said, no, I'm going to grant the department's motion to exclude you from raising those types of defenses because there is no basis in law for you to say those things to a jury. You're just going to confuse them with false information when the real issue that we are now dealing with is simply, did you show up or not show up to a subpoena? And you didn't show up when Congress issued that subpoena as part of the January 6th committee. So I think we're going to see a rather quick trial beginning January 30th of Peter Navarro. I think he's going to be swiftly convicted of the 2 counts, and we'll see from there what happens. I'm sure he'll appeal it the same way Bannon's appealing his conviction. But look, the wheels of justice are turning, and the Department of Justice is putting this guy on trial, and they're winning. They're winning. So we'll keep you updated here with more news on this on the MeidasTouch Network. Hit the subscribe button. We're on our way to 1 million subscribers thanks to your incredible support. Please hit the subscribe button. It's free to subscribe. And check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch. We just held our first exclusive Zoom meeting with our patrons, which went great. We went 2 hours long. We answered every single question of everyone who wanted to ask a question. So if you want to meet us or have conversations with us, we'll be doing another one next month, but join Patreon right now for all the exclusive content that we offer there. Until next time, I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Thank you so much.
At MeidasTouch, we are unapologetically pro-democracy, and we demand justice and accountability. That's why we're spreading our message to Convict 45. That's right, gear up right now with your Convict 45 tees and pins at store.meidastouch.com. That's store.meidastouch.com.